Good day, Year 9. Welcome to another lesson on cells. Today we are going to be looking at prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, but I'll come to that in a minute. Hopefully your sound is on and you are hearing the sound of my voice. If you are having issues, then please let us know. We're carrying on with our biology paper 1. We're on AQA Combined Science Trilogy. Hopefully you've already seen the previous 2 lessons. The first one I did was on the difference between plant and animal cells. The second one will be Miss Corbett doing the required practical using the microscopes. So this is the next lesson in the sequence where we're looking at prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Equipment again that we're going to need is something to write on. Pencil for doing diagrams, so cell diagrams, and a pen for writing. So we are looking at prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells, and there is one big difference between the two of them that we must make sure that we know, which will obviously come to as part of this lesson. The picture that you can see behind you are different stained bacterial cells, which would be a prokaryotic cell, but you don't need to write any of that. Okay, first little activity then. So like in the last video, there will be several points where you're going to have to pause the video, complete the task, and then we'll go through the answers afterwards. So can you have a go at just listing as many different types of cells that you can think of that you will have done at key stage 3. So specific cells from key stage 3. Do it for 1 minute. There's lots of different answers that you could give. But if you could pause the video now and have a go at that. Okay, so I don't know if you were struggling with that. It all depends on how much you can remember from year 7. But ones that come up in year 7 you might have got on your list, and this isn't all of the answers, this is just some of the more obvious ones. You've got things like red blood cells, white blood cells, root hair cells, which are in plants. You might have had palisade cells, neurons or nerve cells, epithelial cells. Yeah, lots of different cells that you might have listed. Okay, but it's just to try and get you into that frame of mind. So if you could have a read through the success criteria, we all need to know what the difference is between a prokaryote and a eukaryote. But also for the higher level, we're looking at the different structures inside them and what it is that they do. And for level 7 to 8, we need to be able to explain how the main structures are related to their functions, and also a little bit of maths in there, performing calculations to work out the orders of magnitude. So let's get going. Something that we covered in lesson number 1 is what cells actually are. So cells are the basic units of living organisms. So all living organisms will contain at least one cell. There is a cell theory, and the cell theory states that all living things are made up of one or more cells, as I just said. Cells are the basic unit of structure and function in living things. So they are the building blocks of life. And all cells come from other cells. So they don't just magically appear. They must have come from somewhere, and that is to do with cell division, which we'll look at in the next chapter. From the animations, you can see there's some bacterial cells on the top right. We have got some unicellular organisms on the bottom left, and we have got some plant cells on the bottom right. Okay, now don't panic. I'm not going to ask you to draw these. But if you look at the top 2 cells, you'll see that these are cells, just a different way of showing it with additional structures that we don't need to know at this point. But you can see there is an animal cell and a plant cells. Animal cells are much smaller than plant cells. These pictures are not to scale, because if it was, the bacterial cell at the bottom would be very, 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 very small. Okay, so bacterial cells are the smallest, followed by animal cells, and then the larger cells tend to be the plant cells. Okay, so what actually is a prokaryote and a eukaryote? So prokaryotes are a group of cells that are single-celled, and they include the bacteria, and it's basically cells that do not contain a defined nucleus. So the nucleus we looked at in lesson 1 is where the genetic information is stored. Is in a defined area. It's actually one of the organelles, so it has a membrane going around the outside. But you don't find those in prokaryotic cells. So prokaryotes are cells that do not contain a nucleus, whereas the eukaryotes, of which we belong, those are organisms where the cells do contain a defined nucleus that contains the genetic information. Prokaryotes have genetic information, it's just not stored inside a nucleus. So eukaryotes, the main sort of groups are the animal cells and the plant cells, because as we've looked at, both of those contain a nucleus. So a little bit of revision from last lesson. Remember, organelles are the structures that are found inside cells. So I've got 4 questions. I'm going to read through them, and then I'd like you to pause the video and have a go at answering them. So question number 1 is listing the organelles. You might see it referred to as subcellular structures, so the structures inside cells. So list the organelles found in both plant and animal cells, and it's worth 5 marks, so we need to be getting 5 different structures. Number 2, which subcellular structures are found only in plant cells? And it's worth 3 marks, so hopefully we figured out that we need to have 3 structures for that. Number 3, what is the function of the nucleus and the cell membrane? Now that's worth 3 marks as well, so you might want to try and get 2 bits of information from what you remember on one of them. And number 4, what structure gives strength to a plant cell? So strength and support. And that's worth 2 marks. So this is only looking at eukaryotic cells. This is stuff that was covered in lesson number 1. So can you either use your notes or your brain, if you do remember, to have a go at answering those questions. You could pause the video now. Okay, so hopefully we had a go at those. We'll go through some of the answers for those questions. So question 1 was list the organelles, or the subcellular structures found in both plant and animal cells. So hopefully we've put the nucleus, because it is a eukaryotic cell, it contains a nucleus, cytoplasm, the cell membrane, the mitochondria, where respiration takes place, and ribosomes, which make proteins, protein synthesis. Number 2, the question was which subcellular structures are found only in plants? So we've got chloroplasts. You might have said that it contains chlorophyll. It's the chloroplasts. We've got the vacuole, the permanent vacuole, and that contains cell sap and a cell wall. Number 3, what is the function of the nucleus and the cell membrane? So the nucleus is what controls the activity, and it contains the genetic information. So that would be 2 separate marks, controlling the activities and containing genetic information, of which you might have said DNA, you might have said chromosomes, or you might have said genes. Any one of those is acceptable. The cell membrane is what controls what goes in and out of the cell. Number 4, what structure gives strength to a plant? That is the cell wall. Now, the cell wall in a plant is actually made of cellulose, which we do not talk about in lesson number 1. So, a cell wall in plants are made of cellulose. And the reason why I'm bringing that up now is because when we look at prokaryotic cells, even though they do have a cell wall, it's made of a different substance. Okay, but we do need to know that the cell walls in plant cells contain cellulose. Right, a little bit of maths for you. Hopefully we are familiar with standard form. So you can see on the left-hand side, we have got some different sizes. The top one is 1 meter, and they get increasingly smaller till you've got 1 times 10 to the minus 9. On the right-hand side, we have a variety of different structures. So what I would like you to do after you've paused the video is write down the name of the structure, and next to it, can you have a go at writing down what size? Sorry about that, you might have heard the phone rang there. So we were just about to pause the video. We were going to put the name of the structure and what size we think it is. Okay, so if you could pause now. All right, let's see how many you guys got right. So hopefully we realise that out of all of those, the largest one, about 1 meter, is going to be a child. The next one is a hamster, and that would be 1 times 10 to the minus 1 meters. So 0.1 meters. A finger will be the next in line for size order, which would be 1 times 10 to the minus 2 meters. So that would be 0.01 meters. Next up is a grain of sand, so a big change there. So we've got 1 times 10 to the minus 3 meters. Next up is the thickness of a single human hair, which would be 1 times 10 to the minus 4 meters. Next up is a eukaryotic cell. Now, I know I said that plant cells are larger than animal cells, but this is putting both of those in there. So we've got eukaryotic cells, they're about 1 times 10 to the minus 5. And as you can see, prokaryotic cells, much smaller, they are 1 times 10 to the minus 6. What's that? 0.00001 meters. Next up is a virus, and they are teeny tiny, 1 times 10 to the minus 7 meters. Then we've got a nanochemical, which is basically containing single atoms. And then finally, we've got a large atom, which is 1 times 10 to the minus 9 meters. So 0.0000001 meters. Right. Now, I know that I have already mentioned this, so we'll see how many people were listening. But what do you think the main difference between a eukaryotic cell, so plant and animal cells are, and a prokaryotic cell is? Okay, hopefully we have got that prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus. So prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus, and eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus. And that's really important because it allows eukaryotic cells, so plants and animal cells, to make multicellular organisms and perform much more complex functions that we wouldn't be able to do if we didn't have that nucleus. Now you can see that there is a YouTube link there. If you want to, go onto the link, the YouTube link, have a look at the video clip, and make some notes on that as you are watching it. Okay, so we saw a picture similar to this in a previous slide, but we've got now a prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell. And the reason why these pictures are here is to show that they both contain genetic information, because genetic information is very important because you need it in order to make new cells. But you'll notice that there isn't that defined nucleus that you will find in the eukaryotic cell. So both of them have got a cell membrane, which is also known as a plasma membrane. Both of them have got cytoplasm. Both of them contain DNA, but the DNA in a prokaryotic cell is just in a region. So it's called the nucleoid region. You do not need to draw these or label these. This will be at A level, so you don't need to worry too much about this. It's just looking at the fact that there is not a nucleus. You will see the nucleus labeled on the eukaryotic cell, and that both of them contain ribosomes. So that is a structure that you will find in plant cells, animal cells, and prokaryotic cells such as bacteria. Also notice the difference in size. So a eukaryotic cell is about 10 to 100 micrometers. That little weird backwards U symbol is a micrometer. And the prokaryotic cell is between 0.1 and 10 micrometers. But there are many, many different types of prokaryotic cell, so they do range in size quite dramatically. Now, here is a basic, he says, basic prokaryotic cell. Please can you have a go at sketching that? If you would prefer to print one off, just Google image prokaryotic cells, print it off. But the important structures that we need to have labelled are ribosomes, the capsule or the slime layer, the cell wall, the cell membrane, DNA, and those little circles which are called plasmids, and a flagellum. One flagellum, several flagella. You don't need to label the mesosome or the nucleoid. But if we can make sure that we have the other labels on there, ignore the top bit. You do not need to leave the room for this. If we're just popping it into our notes. So if you could pause this video, and if you could sketch that diagram or print that diagram and have those labels on there. Okay, so hopefully we have drawn our prokaryotic cell. Please make sure it is labeled as a prokaryotic cell. You'll see that there is a link on this slide, which you can use if you want to get any additional information. Right, examples of prokaryotes. Now, this is actually a very large group of organisms that contain many different species of bacteria. So here are some pictures taken under very powerful microscopes of bacteria, and also cyanobacteria. Now, cyanobacteria contain, you'll probably notice their green coloration, contain chlorophyll or other pigments that absorb light, and they do actually photosynthesize, and we get a huge amount of oxygen from cyanobacteria. It's not just the plants that are photosynthesizing, producing oxygen. So, prokaryotic cells. The structure of prokaryotic cells is illustrated by the structure of a bacterium. Okay, so the diagram that you just sketched out of the prokaryotic cell was a very basic bacterial cell. Now, if you look at the picture, you can see an epithelial cell. So this is just a normal, an average animal cell. You can see the nucleus in the middle, and then those little blue dots that kind of look like little blue rods are bacterial cells. So they are much, much, much smaller than the average animal cell. So here we have got some electron microscope pictures which can pick up much smaller structures. They've got a much greater magnification, showing a bacterial cell. Okay, so we need to be able to describe different structures in our eukaryotic cells and our prokaryotic cells, and also looking at the differences between plant cells and prokaryotic cells, or animal cells and prokaryotic cells. So I said to you that in a plant cell, which is eukaryotic, there is a cell wall that is made of cellulose. In bacterial cells, they do have a cell wall, but it's made of murine as opposed to cellulose. Okay, so if you wanted to add that label to your diagram of a prokaryotic cell next to where you've written cell wall, it does not contain cellulose like a plant cell, it's murine. The plasma membrane, which you guys need to know as the cell membrane, has the same structure in both prokaryotics and eukaryotes. So it doesn't matter whether you're a bacterial cell, a plant cell, or an animal cell, it's going to have the same structure for the membrane, the cell membrane, in all of them. Okay, and remember, the function of the membrane is controlling what goes in and out of the cell. Now, in eukaryotic cells, you'll find structures like mitochondria and the nucleus that are actually membrane-bound themselves. So there'll be a membrane that's going around the mitochondria. There'll be a membrane that goes around the nucleus, but you don't find that in prokaryotic cells. They do not contain membrane-bound organelles. They don't have that nucleus, which is the big difference between them, and that genetic information is just in the cytoplasm. They don't have mitochondria, so mitochondria are a membrane-bound organelle. They do not have mitochondria, and remember from lesson number 1, the mitochondria are to do with getting energy, so for respiration. So they instead have mesosomes, which are kind of foldings of the cell membrane where their respiration takes place. So we talk a lot about the genetic material because that is a big difference between the eukaryotic and the prokaryotic cells. So the genetic material in a prokaryotic cell is not in that specific nucleus. It's packaged slightly differently. There's a single circular piece of DNA that basically forms the bacterial chromosome. So you've got chromosomal DNA inside a bacterial cell, and you've also got those circles that we've labelled, which are the plasmids that we'll talk about in a minute. So it's quite hard to see on the picture, the electron microscope picture of the bacterial cell, but we have got this region in the centre that just contains a long strand of DNA, and that is the bacterial chromosome, or the chromosomal DNA. It is not in a nucleus that is bound to the membrane. Now we also have these structures, these circular structures called plasmids. And as you can see on the bottom left diagram, it's a little bit clearer to see the difference between a bacterial chromosome or chromosomal DNA and a plasmid. They are tiny circles of DNA, and they only carry a few genes on them. So the chromosomal DNA will have a lot more genetic information than in the plasmid. And they're found throughout the cytoplasm. Now, plasmids are an important structure, but they also come up in some later chapters when we're looking at genetic engineering. We've already said, so a similarity between eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells is that both of them have got ribosomes. Now, the ribosomes aren't different in prokaryotic cells. You don't need to worry too much about that. But as we learned in lesson number 1, this is where protein synthesis takes place, because bacterial or prokaryotic cells do require proteins. They're not attached to any of the membranes, which can happen in eukaryotic cells. And they are smaller than that of eukaryotic cells. So they do have ribosomes, but they're free in the cytoplasm, and they are smaller than eukaryotic cells. Now, one of my favourite structures of a prokaryotic cell is called the flagella. Okay, so one flagellum, several flagella. And these pictures that you can see illustrate kind of their structure. Different species will have different numbers of them. Some of them don't have them, but they are kind of like this tail-like structure almost that you find in some prokaryotic cells. So the bacterial flagellum is a whip-like structure, and it rotates, allowing the bacterium to move, because obviously they are single cell, they do not have legs, so they need to be able to get around, and they use the flagella in order to do that. But not all of them have got one, as I said, and some bacterial cells have many, as you can see on some of the pictures. These are unique to prokaryotic cells. You will not find them commonly in the eukaryotic cells. Something else that is unique to prokaryotic cells is something called the slime capsule, or just the capsule, or you can call it the slime layer. Now, as the name suggests, it's got this kind of slimy protein that goes around the outside, and it's really important because it stops the cell drying out. It also means that they're able to stick together. So you can form these colonies of bacterial cells that are stuck together, and they use that slime capsule in order to do that. You can also, it also offers protection if it is one that is found in food and drinking water, things like that. It can also protect it from digestive enzymes so that they don't get killed off in the digestive system. Okay, so some questions now. Question number 1 is worth 8 marks, so we need 8 things in there. What are the organelles in bacterial cells? It does not specify whether it is just in bacterial cells. So any of the structures, any of the organelles that you find in bacterial cells. Number 2, what is the function of flagella? 1 mark. Number 3, what does DNA stand for? Now you might want to leave this PowerPoint and Google that. Some of you will already know it. Don't worry too much about spelling. Have a go at it. Number 4, what are plasmids? And that is worth 3 marks. So I'd like you to pause this video now, and can you have a go at those 4 questions, and then we'll go over the answers. Okay, so we'll go over the answers now of these 4 questions. You don't need to use purple pen. If you have a different colour or a pencil, that will be sufficient. So question number 1, the question was, what are the organelles in bacterial cells? So we have got genetic material, so you could have said chromosomal DNA, or you could have said plasmids. We've got cytoplasm, we've got a cell membrane, we have a cell wall, we have a slime capsule or a slime layer, we've got ribosomes, and we have got flagella, or one flagellum. Question number 2, what is the function of the flagella? It's for movement. Number 3, what does DNA stand for? It stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Well done if you already knew that. Do not panic if you did not. You do not need to use the full term for it. You can use the abbreviation DNA, but it's basically the chemical that has all the genetic information on it. And then number 4, what are plasmids? Plasmids are small circular rings of DNA, for 1 point. You might have said that it carries genetic information. Something that we haven't spoken about yet, which is in purple, but some of you might have known. It can be advantageous to bacteria because it means that they can build up a resistance to things like antibiotics. So that's where we get the antibiotic resistant bacteria from. Now, don't worry if you didn't know that already, because that comes up in a later chapter as well, and mostly in next year's biology, which is all about diseases. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now, using everything that we did in lesson number 1 and in the lesson today, is have a go at describing the similarities and differences between the features found in prokaryotic and eukaryotic plant and animal cells. So it's kind of bringing everything together. What is the same about them? What is different about them? And it's going to be worth 6 marks. So you do need to be taking your time on this. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video and have a go at answering that question. Right, let's see how we got on then. Now, you might have put things that I have not put in this answer, which would be valid. So just have a look back to see whether that is correct or not. But these are kind of 6 big things that you might have mentioned. So you might have said that all of them have cell membranes. You might have taken it further and said about how what the function of the cell membrane is. So controls what goes in and out of the cell. You might have said that all of them have got cytoplasm, so that jelly-like substance where reactions take place, chemical reactions take place. You might have said that you do find cell walls in prokaryotes and eukaryotes, or you might have said that you find them in prokaryotes and plant cells. Big difference, like main difference, prokaryotes do not have a nucleus. They do not have chloroplasts. So even though they might contain pigments for photosynthesis, they do not have chloroplasts. You might have said that eukaryotic cells do not have plasmids. As I say, there are other answers that you might have given, but those are the big ones. Right, now we're going to have a look at some exam questions now. So we'll go through some past paper questions, and the kind of thing that you will be expected to answer and how to actually answer them. So this question says, the diagram shows 2 cells, a bacterial cell and a plant cell. You've got some different structures that have been drawn there. Some of them have been labelled. And you've also got the magnification. Now the magnification comes into play with microscopes. So if you are not familiar with that, do have a look at Miss Corbett's video on microscopes. So here are the questions. A, part 1. Both the bacterial cell and the plant cell contain ribosomes. What is the function of the ribosome? 1 mark. 2A, part 2. The plant cell contains mitochondria, but the bacterial cell does not contain mitochondria. Give one other way in which the plant cell is different from the bacterial cell. 1 mark. So pause this video, have a go at answering both of those questions. Okay, hopefully we had a go at the kind of questions you might get in an exam. So we should have in there for the first question, which was, what is the function of the ribosome? Something about them producing or synthesizing protein. Part 2, give one other way in which the plant cell is different from the bacterial cell. You might have said that the plant cell has a nucleus. You might have said that the plant cell has a vacuole or a permanent vacuole. You might have said the plant cell has chloroplasts or chlorophyll. Or you might have said the plant cell is a lot larger. Ignore the answers underneath, but I would like you to have a look on the right-hand side where it's got extra information. So this is what a mark scheme would look like that the examiner will be following. There are answers that can be accepted. So you can see that allow correct reference of DNA or chromosomes, or allow plant cell has fewer ribosomes, or even allow cellulose for the cell wall. But if you're looking at other GCSE papers, it will specifically say what not to accept. So using these kind of mark schemes are very, very useful. Okay, quiz time. Question 1. Which type of cell is the oldest and simplest? So which have been around the longest and have got the simplest structures inside them? What do you reckon? Prokaryotes. Well done if you got that. Number 2, two big differences between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. So have a think of that one. Okay, some ideas. Prokaryotes have free DNA or not bound in a nucleus, and they don't have membrane-bound organelles. Eukaryotes, the DNA or the genetic information is in the nucleus. That is a big difference, and they have got those organelles, those membrane-bound organelles. You might have said mitochondria or chloroplasts as specific organelles. That's absolutely fine. Question 3, what does the keyword organelles mean? Keep referring to it, but do you know what it means? It actually means little organs, which is adorable. So they're just the small structures that you find inside cells. Question 4, what do organelles do for the cell? Give 2 examples including their function. So you might want to pause this one because it's a little bit longer, and we'll go through the answer next. Okay, so again, you might put some different answers to what is about to put on the board. So if you want to check that, just go back and make sure that what you're putting is scientifically correct. But the organelles are things that carry out specific activities. We have things like mitochondria, which where respiration takes place, or you might have said releases energy. We've got things like the vacuole, which stores cell sap and keeps the structure of the cell. Or you might have put about chloroplasts that absorb sunlight, or you might have said for photosynthesis. Which type of cell is bigger and more complex? Is it the prokaryotic cells or the eukaryotic cells? It is the eukaryotic cells. Well done if you got that. Question number 6, what is one benefit of having DNA housed in a nucleus? It protects the DNA. So you might put protects the DNA, or you might have said that it makes it easier to have multicellular organisms, either one. Number 7, what is a flagellum? It is a tail-like structure, or whip-like structure, that allows movement. You might have just put movement, allows movement of the cell. That's absolutely fine. Now, these little structures, these flagellum, I said it's not commonly found in eukaryotic cells, but there are some cells that do. So cilia can also be found in the human body. What type of specialized cell have cilia, and what is its function? Now, this comes up more in specialized cells. You might have done it at Key Stage 3. Do not worry if you cannot answer this question. It does come up again in the GCSE, but if you have done it in Year 7, then have a go. They are the ciliated cells, as the name suggests. And you'll find these along your trachea, and they're really important because they sweep up dust and bacteria so that they do not get into the lungs. Very important little structures. Okay, so that concludes our lesson on prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. What's the main thing we need to take from this? The big difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells is that prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus. We also need to, if you are still struggling, we need to make sure that we are familiar with that standard form measurements and what a micrometer is. So Google that if you are still unsure. Obviously, don't worry if you are quite happy with that and you remember that from maths. Okay, well, thank you very much for taking the time to go through this. I hope you are all safe and well, and hopefully you will be here next time where we're going to move on to the next cells lesson. Thank you very much.